Okay, so you should have had a look at the Word document with all of the different types of indicators, composite and single, and some of them being proxy indicators now. There's a few things that we need to go through in terms of just evaluating the usefulness of some of those indicators. So the first thing is the problems with the monetary measures. So things like using GNI or GDP or currencies and their values as indicators of development is really difficult because the values of currencies change against each other, which is kind of what we understand by exchange rates. So it's really difficult to make accurate comparisons. In the UAE, we're quite lucky, I suppose, because the currency here, the dirham, is pegged to the US dollar, which means it doesn't fluctuate very much and it's quite stable, which is a really good thing. The difficulty, the second one there with monetary measures, is the difference between a formal and an informal economy. So the formal economy is the and regulated economy, so that businesses pay taxes, there's proper employment laws, people have minimum wages, that their health and safety at work is taken care of, and sort of statistically all of that stuff is measurable. However, in lots of countries, particularly in the developing world, there's quite a big informal economy. So the informal economy can be things like shoe shining, car windscreen cleaning. It can also be things that are a little bit shady as well. So kind of the black market, knockoff or fake goods. I imagine most of you all have kind of been to places where there's people selling kind of counterfeit things. It's also the kind of economy where people don't pay tax on their earnings. They're not regulated, so they could be working in sweatshops like we looked at with the Nike thing, and things like that, which means that there's no way of actually counting it in terms of its value towards the country's economy. So particularly in places like India, a lot of the big informal settlements or slums, there's loads of informal economy going on there, loads of people with little shops that aren't regulated, doing services for people. There's loads of money changing hands, but there's no tax paid and none of that's recorded. So it's really tricky to rely strictly on monetary measures. On the flip side of that, some goods and services are unpaid. So particularly like volunteering for in charities, where you've got countries with quite a big ageing population. So Japan, for example, and some European countries, there's lots of older people that do voluntary work, and that's not counted in the kind of the value of the economy. And then the problem with the monetary measures is they're countrywide. So, for example, China, their GDP or their GNI looks pretty decent, but actually when you drill down into it, most of the value of that comes from the eastern coastline and the big cities of like Shanghai and Beijing. And internally, there's not a lot going on and people are still very, very poor. So those kind of monetary measures, they don't give you a very good overall picture of the discrepancy. Like we talked earlier about growth poles and how cities become really wealthy at the expense of rural areas. And these kind of monetary measures really don't take into consideration anything like that. And the final thing, which I think, as geographers, you guys should be really clued into, is that just looking at money and wealth neglects lots and lots of aspects of development that are really, really important. So education, healthcare, gender equality, just equality of any sort, people's freedom of speech, freedom of movement, all of those sorts of things are really important indicators of development that you can't really measure with money. And although there is, to be fair, in most cases, a strong correlation between a wealthy society and those kind of freedoms, it's not necessarily always the case. Okay, so where are we up to now? We've got one more slide here. Problems and limitations of development indicators. So this slide's just looking through a few of the other issues with indicators that aren't monetary. So although the top one there says, although development indicators can be useful for governments to know where to target investment and where to locate industries and stuff, they do have limitations. So we talked about that countrywide variation. That's really difficult to deal with. A lot of countries' data is inaccurate or incomplete. I'll put a little video on here as well that you can have a look at about why we need development data. Some countries also refuse to release certain pieces of information or data. So, for example, at the moment, North Korea apparently doesn't have any cases of coronavirus. That might be true because they might have shot everyone, or it might not be true and they might just be lying. Most development indicators only, so this is our single indicators, they only focus on one aspect of developments. They don't give us a very kind of holistic picture. There are some other development indicators out there that are very, very complex. So there's the Legatum Prosperity Index, which has 88 different variables in it. So it's wicked hard to calculate, but it gives you such a good kind of overview of the country and its kind of holistic development. So those kind of single versus composite indicators is quite important. Most indicators use averages and tend to neglect or highlight the sectors of the population that are marginalised. This is very true. Again, in China, the Uyghur people that live in the northwest of China are kind of the Muslim Chinese population, and they're very much marginalised in Chinese society. So it's really difficult to actually really understand what life is like for them in China because all of the other statistics don't really tell you. Indicators are always out of date. So, for example, in most developed countries, there's a census which is conducted either every 5 or 10 years where household level data is gathered on kind of age, employment, educational qualifications, a whole raft of information, but it takes so long to compile all of that information and get it into a usable form that by the time it sort of goes live, it's already usually like 2 years out of date. So that's pretty tricky. And also you can use development indicators to suit your own purpose. So you can pick a specific indicator that sort of highlights the thing that you're trying to show and not show all the other indicators. So, you know, a lot of single indicators are very much open to bias and manipulation. So just in terms of these limitations of indicators in general and monetary indicators, just make sure that you've got a sense of maybe 3 or 4 for each of them reasons why, reasons to be critical about them, so that you could answer those types of questions if they come up. And then there's just a bit of information here about patterns of development. That's pretty obvious. And then finally, at the end of the PowerPoint here, there are 3 slides which is a question, so it'll give you a chance to apply your knowledge. So I didn't really want that, but anyway. Oh no. Okay, so I don't know how to turn the subtitles off, so I'm just going to roll with this. This question here, you can copy it onto a Word document if you can't see it very well on that blue background. So it's just a graph on the y-axis, GDP per capita in US dollars, and on the x-axis, population with access to safe water. So we would probably expect to see with these two variables a fairly strong positive correlation between them, indicated by the location of the countries on the graph. Okay, on the next slide, there are some questions here. So you've got a 1 mark question, a 2 mark, a 3 mark, and a 4 mark. Have a go at those. See how you get on. Mark your own. It says have a go days. Mark your own answers. The mark scheme is here. Don't look at that first. Do try, have a go, and just test yourself. If you've got any questions about how any of the answers are derived, just ask on the chat. Okay, so that is you done for today's work. Okay, so Thursday, just a reminder, a little bit of an indicators quiz. We will have a look at how to apply 2 case studies that you've done already as well to a 7 mark question, just so you can get that straight in your head. Okay.